Cornerstone presents Into the Deep, Why Do Virtues and Vices Matter? Before we go into the deep, let's take a look at what virtues and vices are. Virtues are habits that bring a full commitment to the devout life. They are behaviors that show high moral standards and form a person's character. Without personal virtue, we would do good only sporadically. Bad bricks, however well arranged, don't make a good building. Vices are the opposite. They are habits that bring us into sin. Sin is a thought, word, or deed that is contrary to God's law. Each time we sin, we are choosing to put a barrier between us and God. Vices are also known as the 7 deadly sins or the 7 capital sins because they are the source of all other sins. They block us from having purity of heart, which prevents us from seeing God. Are you ready to go into the deep? Why do virtues and vices matter? The way we live each moment, both seen and unseen to others around us, matters. Our choices either come from the 7 vices or the 7 virtues. Let's take a closer look at each. From the days of Plato and Aristotle, 4 virtues have been traditionally recognized as the foundation of all of the other virtues. These are called the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. We see them mentioned in Wisdom chapter 8, verse 7. Prudence is the ability to see the good in every situation and be able to achieve it. When we practice the virtue of prudence, we are able to order our lives to the good both in our physical and our spiritual life. An example of this would be checking your bank account before you spend money. Justice is the constant and firm will to give God and neighbor their due. Power is meant to serve justice, and justice is meant to serve love. When we practice the virtue of justice, we constantly remind ourselves of the inherent dignity of every human being from conception to death. An example of justice is treating others the way you would like to be treated. Fortitude is the strength, firmness, and consistency to practice the other virtues, even in difficult situations. It allows us to overcome fear, even fear of death, trials, and persecution. An example of fortitude is making the sign of the cross and saying the grace before meals out loud in a restaurant. Temperance is a virtue that allows us to overcome our instincts, desires, and fears. It helps us to moderate our attraction to different pleasures and provides us with a balance. An example of temperance is watching one episode of your favorite show and then going outside, even when there are 13 other episodes you could watch. The 4 cardinal virtues are natural. They are known by human reason, have their origin in human nature, and their goal is perfecting human character and life. The 3 theological virtues, on the other hand, are supernatural. They are revealed by God and known by faith, infused by God into the souls of the faithful, and their purpose is our participation in the divine nature. They have God as their object, faith in God, hope in God, and love of God and of neighbor for God's sake. Faith allows us to believe in God and everything He has revealed to us as truth, because He is truth Himself. An example of this is from the song Down in Adoration Falling, which we often sing in adoration. One of the verses says, "Faith will tell us Christ is present when our human senses fail. Our minds are finite and cannot grasp the infinite unless the infinite shares with us the power to do so through the gift of faith. When God reveals to us that He will always be with us and loves us with unconditional love, we believe it because God is truth and can only speak truth." Hope is the theological virtue that allows us to desire the kingdom of heaven and eternal life as our happiness. Hope is faith directed toward the future and is the strongest source of the virtue of fortitude. An example of this would be Viktor Frankl's quote from the Auschwitz death camp in his book Man's Search for Meaning. "Man can endure almost any how, if only he has a why." Love or charity is the theological virtue that is the most indispensable of all virtues, the greatest of all virtues, the greatest of the commandments, and the very nature of God. The word love, as a virtue, could be misunderstood due to today's use of the word. The theological virtue of love is not just a feeling or emotion, but the choosing of the will and an obeying. Christ died out of love for us while we were still enemies. Mary still helps us to this day to draw closer to her Son, even when we fail multiple times each day. This love is freeing. It allows us to stand in front of the Lord, not as slaves, but as children who respond to love with love. We strive to live virtuously through the grace of God, but sometimes we fall into sin. It is important to examine our conscience daily and receive the sacrament of reconciliation regularly. It is also important to have a knowledge of the vices or the 7 deadly sins, because they are the source of all other sins. When we have a knowledge of where our sins stem from, we are better able to live more virtuous lives. Pride is the deadliest of all deadly sin. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux composed a treatise for monks titled The Steps of Humility and Pride. He lists among other things the dangers of inordinate curiosity, idle chatter, and senseless foolishness and laughter, trying to be different, considering oneself holier than others, self-justification, minimizing one's sin in confession, and rebelling against authority. Such desire for attention was, to Bernard's mind, an early symptom of pride. Pride is the fountain of all other sin. It is also the sin of Lucifer. In the extreme form of pride, one cannot have fear of the Lord. The opposite of pride is humility, which is the most attractive of virtues. Humility is understanding that one is not totally self-sufficient. One depends on the encouragement of others and on their love. It is acknowledging the truth about oneself. A humble person is free to ask for help and counsel and be grateful. If you find yourself trapped in the sin of pride, Bishop Robert Barron recommends deliberately drawing attention away from yourself toward others. Learn to notice the value in the simple things and surrender to them like a child does. Find joy in the simple things. Envy is the daughter of pride and the second deadly sin we are going to dive into. Envy appears when good fortune falls on someone else. St. Thomas Aquinas describes envy as sadness at the goods possessed by another that comes with a complex tone of suppressed rage, melancholy, and festering resentment directed at another. We can find envy lurking beneath passive-aggressive behavior. The opposite of envy is admiration. When we practice admiration, we see everything as a gift, whether it is a gift for us or for someone else. Bishop Barron recommends praising another person when we feel envious feelings, and stop the practice of comparing yourself to others. Anger or wrath is a passion for revenge that goes beyond the control of reason. Getting angry is different from being an angry person. Internalized anger is fueled by disappointment, wounded pride, real or imagined slights, disappointment with one's situation in life, or other personal affronts that smolder within a person. Anger is often undetectable by others, but becomes a lens through which that angry person sees the world. Anger only hurts the person who possesses it. Anger's opposite is love and concern for others. We are called to bear another's burden just as Jesus bore ours. Understand why you are angry and learn how to let go of it. Practice forgiveness of others and of yourself. Bishop Barron recommends taking a concrete step, however small, toward healing a broken relationship with someone against whom you held a grudge. Forgive quickly and do not let resentments fester. Refrain from gossip and criticize someone else only in the measure to which you are willing to help that person address the problem. Sloth is the next deadly sin and is an indifference towards spiritual things. A slothful person views the pursuit of the good and virtuous life as overwhelming, unattractive, and at worst, impossible. They view their life as having no purpose, no energy, no reason. They are there to tolerate everything and everyone without bothering to search for a higher purpose or good. Please note that there is a difference between the sin of sloth and the ailment of depression. Zeal is the opposite of sloth. Each one of us is sent on a mission, and our life has a purpose and meaning. Mary making haste to visit Elizabeth is a great example of zeal. Taking care of others allows you to bring the focus away from yourself. Bishop Barron suggests working on discerning how you have been sent by God, refining your sense of mission. Greed is the next deadly sin. St. Thomas Aquinas found greed to be the most deadly sin because of its dynamic capacity to engender the other sins. The American writer and philosopher James Ogilvy said, "Greed turns love into lust, leisure into sloth, hunger into gluttony, honor into pride, righteous indignation into anger, and admiration into envy. If it weren't for greed, we'd suffer fewer of the other vices." Greed can also be a communal fault, as we see in modern consumerism. Generosity is the virtue we need to overcome greed. It allows us not to be bound ultimately to the goods we were given. Bishop Barron suggests doing something each day to remind yourself of the poor. Distinguish between what you need and what you want. The next deadly sin we are going to learn about is gluttony. Gluttony is the inordinate appetite for food and drink which could lead to sloth. The abuse and misuse of food for personal gratification is an injustice to the poor. The opposite of gluttony is temperance, the ability to deny and bring limits to the satisfaction of sensual pleasure in order to focus better on the spiritual goals of our life. Jesus recommends 3 aesthetic practices in Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 to 16, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. To limit a good for a pure purpose is to rightly order the appetites. The seventh deadly sin is lust. Lust is the distortion of sexual desire, where we use another human being as a means to our own sexual gratification. St. Augustine, in his work Confessions, insists on the point that the lust he experienced controlled him until he was capable of controlling it through God's grace. Sexual urges are normal and good until they become disordered and see the other as an object to be used. Lust is sinful when desiring more money, honor, sexual gratifications controls us rather than us controlling the desire. Chastity is the virtue that rids us of lust. It is a morally upright expression of one's sexuality, which always profoundly respects the personhood and inherent dignity of the other, as made in the image and likeness of God. Bishop Barron suggests ridding your life of pornography entirely and not cooperating with that industry. Cut out all activity and sexual expression, which is manipulative of another person. It is important to understand the vices and the virtues that can overcome the vices, since each minute of our day is spent walking towards or away from our goal to be with God eternally in heaven. If you find yourself trapped in a deadly sin, start where you are and not where you would like to be. Go to confession and find a spiritual director that you can work with to create an action plan that works for you and your state of life. Oscar Wilde once said, "The only difference between the saint and the sinner is that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future." Here are the resources used in the making of this video. The 7 Deadly Sins, A Visitor's Guide by Lawrence S. Cunningham. How Catholics Live, Section 4, Virtues and Vices by Peter Kreeft. 7 Deadly Sins, 7 Lively Virtues, a YouTube video by Bishop Robert Barron. Cornerstone. Follow, guide, lead.